Welcome to the Athletes Health Podcast here, talking to athletes, coaches, leaders, anyone we can learn some tips, tricks, tools from, up that mental game, that mental performance through kind of stories and everything else with it. And today, through one way or another, connecting with Terry Tucker as the guest today. And Terry, I'm really excited for this conversation. I think I'm gonna learn a lot from you just in it of itself, and I think we're gonna have some fun talking points. And I'm glad we're getting this going. But I think it's best if you just introduce yourself here fast off the table. I know you have an array of kind of history here and different things we could talk about, so I think it'll be pretty cool. But feel free, introduce yourself fast before we kind of start talking here.
Sure. First, Gabe, thanks for having me on. I'm really looking forward to talking with you today. Yeah, my name is Terry Tucker. I was born on the south side of Chicago. I'm the oldest of three boys. You can't tell this from looking at me or from my voice, but I'm 6'8" tall and actually went to college at the Citadel in Charleston, South Carolina on a basketball scholarship, despite having three knee surgeries in high school. I have a brother who's 6'7", who was a pitcher for the University of Notre Dame's baseball team. Another brother who's 6'6", who was drafted by the Cleveland Cavaliers, the National Basketball Association. And then my dad was 6'5". So we used to joke that if you sat behind our family in church growing up, not a prayer's chance you were going to see anything that was going on in the front of the church. But our 5'8" mother was really the boss. It didn't matter how big, tall, strong we were. Whatever mom said, that's the way it went. When I graduated from college, I moved home to find a job. I'm really going to date myself, but this is long before the internet was available to help people find employment. I did find that first job in the corporate headquarters of Wendy's International, the hamburger chain, in their marketing department. That was the good news. The bad news was I lived with my parents for the next 3.5 years as I helped my mother care for my father and my grandmother, who were both dying of different forms of cancer. After Wendy's, I went to work for the hospital that cared for my father and my grandmother. And then at 37, I made a major pivot in my life and became a police officer. And part of what I did during my law enforcement career was I was a SWAT hostage negotiator. After that, I started a school security consulting business. I coached girls' high school basketball when we lived in Texas. But for the last 12 years now, I've been battling this rare form of cancer, this rare form of melanoma. And then finally, my wife and I have been married for 31 years. We have one child, a daughter, who's a graduate of the United States Air Force Academy and is an officer in the new branch of the military, the Space Force.
She's part of Space Force now.
Yeah.
Wow, that's pretty cool. I mean that's insane. That's an insane story too, Terry. I mean, I know it was just the Cliff Note version, but that's exactly why I was excited to talk to you and why I wanted you to explain it, because you have all that rich history and it can tie in perfectly to some of these things we're going to talk about. And honestly, before we kind of just talked briefly before the show and everything else, I didn't know like sports was that involved in your family and everything of the sorts. With so when I plan to touch base on all your journey in your life just because I'm so interested in it. But when did the motivationalcheck.com in your book really come out, and when did that kind of flourish into what you're doing too? Because that to me, that's just a big cornerstone of kind of the messaging that you've gotten behind everything you've done in your life, and what really stood out to me too.
Sure. So really that kind of came into being around 2020, around the COVID time. I wrote Sustainable Excellence, my first book, uh, and it was published in 2020, October, late 2020. And motivational check was a term that was given to us when we were in the police academy. And we had a defensive tactics instructor that the guy was pretty much crazy. I mean, we would run all over the city as part of our PT. I remember one time there was this beautiful apartment building and it had this fountain out in front of it. It was a huge fountain, and the fountain was about a foot and a half deep. And we would run like 5 miles to this apartment complex and then get in the fountain and do calisthenics, do push-ups, do sit-ups, in a foot and a half of water, and then run back. And you're all soaked and everything like that. But motivational check was a term that if you were just having a bad day, if you didn't think you could go on, you were really hurting, that you could just yell out motivational check. And the rest of the class would respond with our class number. We were the 84th recruit class, just to let the person know, hey, you're not alone. We're here for you. We're hurting too, but we'll get through this ugliness, this difficulty, this adversity together as a group, not as an individual. So when I was looking for a name for my company, motivational check just seemed to be something that resonated with me and something that I thought would be a good name.
And what made you want to like get your company going too? I know we won't talk about it too much, but that was something else I was wondering too, especially after hearing kind of everything you've done.
Yeah, so motivational check is really the umbrella that I use for speaking and for writing. I've just written another book, so I'm working on getting that published now. So I needed sort of an umbrella, I guess, to do all that in sort of a corporate way, as opposed to just me doing it individually. And so that's how I started motivational.
And I want to hear, maybe you share one of these stories or whatever the case is, knee surgeries, different jobs, the cancer, which I know family members who have gone through it and it can be tough and you've been going through it for a while. How have all those like the experiences led into you trying to distribute all this wealth of information out to people and help people out ultimately is one of the things that you said to me that you really trying to do and everything.
Yeah, that's really what I feel at this point in my life, my purpose is. And if you look back on my life, so much of my life had been doing physical things. I was a college athlete, I was a police officer, I was on the SWAT team, and now I'm in a wheelchair and I had my left leg amputated during COVID. So how do you balance those two? And I think when you can't do what you're good at, you do what's important in life. And right now, I think I'm doing what's important, put as much goodness, positivity, motivation, love back into the world as I possibly can with whatever time I have left. So I think my whole life has really been a culmination, as I'm in all honesty, probably coming to the end of my life, of everything that I've learned that I would now like to at least offer to people to see if it might help them.
So that's so crazy. I mean, but it's the truth, right? I mean, so I want to get into like your kind of you have like four truths. And I mean, I just said it's the truth that you really, at least that drew out to me, drew my attention. Are those kind of the main messaging points that you think people really need to know? Or
I mean, they are now. The Four Truths, the new book that I've got coming out is called Four Truths and a Lie. And I really speak a lot, especially when I do podcasts and that, and sometimes on in-person stages as well. I talk about the four truths and have different stories that illustrate them and things like that. So it just was sort of a natural extension that, well, maybe I could take those, what I talk about, and put them into a book form and offer them in that sort of genre as well.
and I think that's such a good idea, and because they come from all the hardships that you've had too, and because as you know, as we said, a lot of the audience are going to be they're competing and stuff. I mean, and then there's other people in my audience who like just listen and follow along for more of the life aspect too. But there's always challenges and stuff, and that's where I like these truths so much too. Just an addition to your whole story and all the challenges you've had and things you maneuvered. Are you okay if we go into like each truth here? Kind of walk
Sure.
through them, see how they go. I probably have some follow-up questions on them too, I'm sure. Is that
Absolutely.
okay?
Yeah,
Cool.
that'd be great.
So the first one I had was controlling your mind so it doesn't control you. Where did this really come from? Was this from the training for the police SWAT force too, or where did this stem from?
This really this is the one that I kind of learned early in my life. And I think it's sort of the overarching truth. If the rest of them are important, but if you can't control your mind, and I think as we go through them, we'll sort of come back full circle to
Yeah.
controlling your mind. And so when I was 15 years old, I had my first knee surgery, and I ended up having three knee surgeries in high school. And I remember when I went back playing basketball after those knee surgeries, my brain, my mind was putting all kinds of negative thoughts into my consciousness. Things like, hey, you're probably a step slower since you've had your surgeries. And college coaches aren't going to be interested in reaching out about playing for their college or university. And I remember thinking, wait a minute, I am still playing at an elite level, and college coaches are still reaching out about the possibility of playing for their college or university. I learned that I needed to sort of change the narrative that my brain was putting into my mind. And so the Cleveland Clinic, fairly prestigious healthcare organization, has determined that on any given day, we have 60 to 70,000 thoughts that just pass through our mind. And 95% of those are thoughts from either the day before or days before. So on any given day, we have about 3,500 new thoughts that come into our minds. In addition, our brains operate at the speed of about 1,000 words a minute and produce enough energy to power a 25-watt light bulb. But given all those thoughts, our mind can still only hold one thought at a time. Why would you want to make that a negative? The problem with most of us, and I'm guilty of this several times during my life, is that we think with our fears and our insecurities instead of using our minds. And I'll leave you with this last story. When I was growing up in Chicago, Bobby Knight, the basketball coach at Indiana University, was very prominent.
Yeah.
And one of my friends, one of my the guys I played against in high school, Isaiah Thomas, ended up going to play for Knight at Indiana, won a national championship, then went on to the NBA, won a couple of NBA championships with the Pistons,
Yeah.
and is now in the Hall of
Prevalent
Fame.
name.
Yeah,
Prevalent name. Yeah.
yeah. A great guy and a tremendous basketball player. But, we used to see each other in the summer when we would come back to Chicago. And I remember him telling me that Knight had this saying, this quote that he would use. And the quote was, mental is to physical as 4 is to 1. So here's this great coach teaching premier elite athletes how to use their bodies to be great basketball players on the court. But what he's really saying with that quote is that your mind or your mindset is 4 times more important to your overall success than anything your physical body is going to do.
Well, that is just so cool to hear because that's kind of the same patterns that I try and tell people and help people out and think about that stuff. And that's an amazing story. And where it originates from is so true. Do you one thing that I often give out, because I know this is your first truth of controlling your mind so it doesn't control you is pretty umbrella term, and some of the other truths might help it out explain this. But one thing I give out to people or I try and help people with is just simple like tricks and tools to really apply these concepts. Because it's one thing for Bob Knight and for us to share the story of 4 to 1 mind to actual training and physical stuff. I'm sure you probably have one of these, which is why I'm asking. What's like one simple trick or tool that you have or that you know through all your stuff that you've done that allows you to actually implement that instead of just theoretical?
Sure. So I guess let me tell you another story, and then I'll kind
Yeah,
of
I love stories, so keep them
tie
coming.
it together with a tip or something that people can
Yeah,
actually use. So when I went to college, the Citadel is a military college, and one year when I was there, we had a president of the college by the name of James Stockdale. Now Stockdale had retired as a rear admiral in the Navy, but he was a fighter pilot during the Vietnam War, and he was shot down during that conflict and spent almost 8 years in the infamous Hanoi Hilton prisoner of war camp. And for all he did in terms of prisoner resistance, code of conduct, everything he put in place, he was actually awarded the Medal of Honor, our nation's highest military award. Now, he was the president of the college, so I didn't spend a lot of time around him. But I remember being at an event where somebody said to him, who were the people that survived that torture, that brutality, that confinement? And he said, well, let me tell you who didn't survive. He said it was the big, tall, strong, tough guys who thought that they could handle any kind of abuse or torture. And the other group he said didn't survive, and this really kind of surprised me. He said were the optimists. He said these were the people who thought that they would be rescued or let go by, Thanksgiving or Christmas or Easter. Thanksgiving, Christmas, and Easter would come and go and they wouldn't be rescued. And he said those people died of a broken heart. He said the people that survived were the people that understood what they could control, which according to Stockdale was basically the breathing in our lungs and the thoughts in our mind. Everything else was at the discretion of the enemy and controlled it. He once said that you must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which you can never afford to lose, with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality. And so here's what I tell people, or here's what I recommend to people. Whatever's bothering you, whatever's concerning you in your life, just take a piece of paper, whatever that issue is, and write down every single thing that's bugging you about that. And then once you have that whole list down on a piece of paper, go through that list and cross out everything that you don't have any control over and spend the rest of your time with what's left on the list, because those are things you can control.
That's awesome. Thank you. And that in your story of the POW, isn't that's very similar to what I think it's Viktor Frankl, or the Holocaust psychologist survivor, also kind of says too. It's very similar. And I knew a couple of years ago, I had trained, I won't say any names here, but a older gentleman who was actually a POW in the, I think, Vietnam War, for like 2 years. And he told me his transformation, but he has the mindset, but it's very similar to the stories you just said. The guys went in there 180, 190, 200, healthy men, and they were only fed. He would tell me these stories in detail. It was crazy when I worked out with him. They only fed him bread and very dirty water when they would, and he left like $130 and got bullet hole as they rescued him. And it was insane stories, but it goes back exactly to what you were just saying of the faith almost control what you can't control and keep it going. Basically back to the mind doesn't control you.
Exactly. I mean, Stockdale and his wife ended up writing a book after he was released, and it's called In Love and War. And it's a real interesting book because he writes a chapter and then she writes a chapter. So it's basically like, here's what was going on with me in the prisoner of war camp. And then here's what, as his wife, I was doing to try to get them free. And the book goes really into detail about how they would write each other letters, but the letters were in code and things like that. So it's a really fascinating book, In Love and War. If you're interested in that kind of stuff, it talks about their mindset. And Stockdale is one of those people that is sort of associated with the Stoic philosophers. He kind of had that Stoic mindset and things like that. And so a very interesting guy. I wish he was still here, but unfortunately passed away a number of years ago.
That I'm going to have to check out that book. That sounds like a very fascinating read, actually. And I can just think about how that ties back to so many things of your life too. But I want to go to the second point here fast, and then after we get through them, we'll probably weave back and forth some more stories. I have a feeling, but embracing the pain and difficulty and using it to make you a stronger and more determined individual. I feel like that's one that some people know about, other people don't know about, and some people, maybe they know it themselves, but no one else really, like, they don't talk about it. Like, I feel like it's a spectrum of who uses that one, where it goes. Take it away. The story that comes from, how you come and use that as one of your 4 truths, because I'm sure there can be so many other ones. But what are your thoughts?
Sure. So our mammalian brains are hardwired to avoid pain and discomfort and to seek pleasure. So to the brain, the status quo, the way things are right now, hey, it's comfortable, it's familiar, just leave it alone. But like you say, we all know this. The problem with that is the only way you're going to grow, the only way you're going to get better, the only way you're going to improve is if you step outside those comfort zones and you do things that make you uncomfortable. I mentioned that I used to be a girls' high school basketball coach. One of the things I used to constantly tell my players is that they needed to become comfortable with being uncomfortable. We're all going to experience pain in our lives. And it doesn't have to be, cancer pain like mine. It could be as simple as, you break up with your boyfriend or your girlfriend, or the flight you're leaving on to go on vacation gets canceled, or you unexpectedly get let go from the job that you absolutely love. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. Suffering depends on what you do with that pain. Do you use it to make you a stronger and more resilient individual? Or do you wallow in it and feel sorry for yourself and want others to feel sorry for you? There was a real prolific writer of our time, died in the 1960s by the name of Ernest Hemingway. And he wrote
Right.
a
Yeah.
book called Farewell to Arms. And it's a semi autobiographical book about his time as an ambulance driver for the Italian army during World War One. And he's got a line in that book that I absolutely love. And the line is this: life breaks everyone. And afterward, many are stronger at the broken places. So just like if you were to break your arm and a doctor would set it and put it in a cast, when that arm heals at that site of the break, it will be stronger. That bone will be stronger at the break point than it will be the rest of the bone. So that's a metaphor for life. Life is going to beat you to your knees. It's going to destroy you from time to time. But here's a good story and another true story. Back in 1976, it was our country's bicentennial celebration. Coincidentally, it was also the year of my 16th birthday, but we don't have to talk about that. So there was a U.S. gold medal winning Olympic swimmer by the name of Shirley Babashaw, who had one of the greatest yet simplest quotes that I ever heard. And this is what she said: winners think about what they want to happen. Losers think about what they don't want to happen. So winners can override that mammalian brain, that those negative brains, and focus on the things they want to occur. Losers focus on the negative aspects of competition and can't see the positive qualities of pursuing a goal or a dream.
And with that, you're, I mean, I know the answer, but we're saying that the winners most likely embrace those difficult times more. Do they know that those difficult times come with the winning feats, that they kind of need to be almost broken to be stronger, like the bone instance that you said? And the losers, maybe, is it that maybe they haven't had that experience before, that they just don't know about that? Or what are your thoughts around that?
I think they do know. Usain Bolt, the fastest man, or used to be the fastest man in the world with the last Olympics. I don't know if somebody broke his record, but he ran like a 9.58 100-yard dash. And he had a great quote. He said, I spent 8 years learning to run 9 seconds. And so many people give up on their dreams, their hopes, their desires after trying it for just a few months. So when you understand that, the fastest man in the world, he knew about adversity. I mean, think all the setbacks over those 8 years, all the races he didn't win that prepared him to win the Olympics, yeah, and run a 9.58 100-yard dash. I mean, think about the people who said the 4-minute mile will never be broken until the first person did it. And then all kinds of people came after it and did it. So, yeah, people understand that adversity has to be used in order to get to a point where you're the best at what you do or what you want to do.
And just to kind of wrap that up, I'm just thinking to tying it to some athletes who I've coached who, and even just my own life too, where things are challenging and then you're kind of like, this is challenging. Is it whatever, the case. And I like how you're saying the long term, I like how you're using Usain Bolt's quote, because I'm just thinking another basketball term story that everyone knows is Michael Jordan took 6 years before I think it was 6 years, right? Before he finally won an NBA championship. And before that, it was Isaiah Thomas beating him up all the time, right? And the Pistons beating him up. But it's that perspective shift of they were kept embracing the pain, the difficulty, whereas other times it happens once or twice to us, and then we're like, I don't want to do that anymore. But that is actually part of it, is what this is really showing me.
It is. You're absolutely right. It is part of it. And Jordan knew that. Jordan knew that, I'm getting my butt kicked here by these Pistons. They're more physical than I am. So I don't necessarily have to do more on the basketball court. I got to do more in the weight. I've got to get stronger. I've got to get better so I can take the pounding, at the end of the season after 82 basketball games and now go into the playoffs. And I think for your audience, a simple way to really kind of make this work for you is this. And I do this every day of my life. So I'm not recommending anything that I don't do. Every day,
Yeah.
do one thing that scares you, that makes you nervous, that makes you uncomfortable, that's potentially embarrassing. It doesn't have to be a big thing. But if you do those small things every day, when the big disasters in life hit us, and they hit all of us, somebody close to us passes away, we unexpectedly get let go from our job, we find out we have a chronic or a terminal illness, you will be so much more resilient to handle those difficulties than those people who never push themselves beyond their comfort zones.
Hey, thanks again for tuning into the Athlete's Health podcast. Your support really does mean a lot. We are passionate about bringing the mental health and performance topics to the forefront because, let's be real, the mental health crisis is a huge issue in society. Now, if you're enjoying the show, it would mean the world to us if you could just give it a 5-star review and share it with anyone who might benefit this message. Every bit helps in spreading the word and creating a stronger, healthier community. This podcast is just a small part of what we are doing at the Athlete's Health. We work directly with teams, coaches, and individual athletes even to help them unlock their full mental performance and ultimately overall performance. Now, whether that's getting the competitive edge, breaking through mental blocks, or just leveling up in the mental gym, we're trying to cover it all with people. So thank you for listening and supporting our mission. Now let's get right back to the show. Yeah, and those difficulties are going to come. No, regardless of whatever you do, you can't control everything, and they're going to come. Cool. I'm going to move on to the next one just because I want to make sure we get through all of them.
Sure,
We
no
can
problem.
keep
I
going on
talked to
tangents.
about
No,
that.
I keep talking. I love the stories and I love our little tangents. That's exactly why I like to have these conversations because we pull so much out of it. I just want to make sure I can get us through the next 2 points. And
You got it.
that's the only reason, because I love the conversations and I love these points. Third one is the understanding that what you leave behind is what you weave into the hearts of other people. And this one really stood out to me a lot because this one specifically, at least in what I've been doing and researching and delivering to people, it's not talked about as much. That what you're doing and leave behind is really what weaves into the hearts of other people. And so I was kind of wondering why that's one of your 4, and then we can go on any stories or anything else that it brings for us. But
Yeah, I mean, the reason it's one of the 4 is because it really is talking about your legacy. What are you leaving behind after you're gone? And Gabe, you're a young man, but there was do you know who Fred Rogers was, Mr. Rogers?
yeah, and
Yeah.
I know who Mr. Rogers was.
All right.
Yeah.
And I have to ask that now because as we get farther and farther down the road.
Yeah, I think my age is probably one of the last that
Yeah,
I'm 20. I just turned 24. So I think 2000 baby. So I think my age is one of the last that
yeah,
probably know about him.
I think his last show was in 2001. So yeah, you're probably one of the last groups. But Fred Rogers, who was a television personality, he started a program called Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, educated so many young children, including me, on public television. When Fred Rogers died in 2003, his family was going through his effects and they found his wallet. And inside his wallet was a scrap piece of paper on which Mr. Rogers had written four simple words. And those words were, life is for service. I think it's important for all of us, regardless of what stage of life we're in, to think about the end game. What do you want people to say at your funeral? And then contrast that with, if you died today, what would people say about you at your funeral? When I found out I had these tumors in my lungs and had my leg amputated, I went with my wife to the mortuary, to the cemetery, and to the church, and I planned my funeral. And because I give these talks either on stage or on podcasts of motivation and the need to keep moving forward, I actually got some brushback from people who commented that planning my funeral was in some way defeatist. I had to remind these folks that the last time I checked, we're all going to die. As far as I know, nobody's working on a cure for life right now. Every one of us is going to die, but not every one of us is going to truly live. And I'll leave you with this. I heard a Native American Blackfoot proverb years ago that I absolutely love. And it goes like this: when you were born, you cried and the world rejoiced. Live your life in such a way so that when you die, the world cries and you rejoice. That's what I want. That's what I'm looking for.
You gave me chills on all that, on all those points. And it was too many for me to really recap back, but because it was just all so good. So I would say listen back, because I'm going to listen back to that part, Terry. And one thing that did stand out to me though was your part of leave your legacy. So locally here, there's some people who I know, and that it's a good sports family, and they're very prevalent now. But they have a leave your legacy. Like, that's been their thing the whole time, since the kids were young. And I want your viewpoints on this, because I've talked to some people and I see more people my age doing this now. And as the whole thing, I'm trying to help like the next generation come up, like younger than me too, but to do things like now that will affect your future, like help yourself out for the future. Think about that stuff, like you just said, and how it affects other people too, of what you can even do right now, how you can learn more things and help other people out. And I just say all that because that's pretty relevant to what you just said. At least those were some thoughts that I thought about. It's not just, oh, live day to day. It's also, how are you giving back and planning the future.
And you're absolutely right. And Merrill Lynch, a money management company, did a survey of older adults. And more than 80% of those older adults felt that leaving a legacy had nothing to do with anything material that you leave behind. It's really the connections that we have with each other. There's a professor at the University of Chicago, a
No.
psychology professor, who does this experiment with his students. He has them go out and get on a bus. And the idea is, in 3 questions, to be deep with somebody. So you get on a bus, you sit down next to somebody, and it's like, hey, Gabe, how's it going? Oh, it's going fine. That's question 1. Question 2, and I'm just making this up. What do you
Yeah.
do for a living? I'm a doctor. That's question 2. Question 3, have you always wanted to be a doctor? No, I grew up on a farm. I wanted to be a vet, but X, Y, and Z happened. Or, yeah, I really loved my dad. He was my hero, and he was a doctor, and he wanted. Now you're deep with somebody. We don't go deep with people anymore. Social media allows us to stay on the surface with people, but we absolutely don't go deep with people. And one of the nurses that cares for me, for the tumors I have in my lungs, used to be a hospice nurse. And for those of your audience who don't know about hospice, it's people who take care of others at the end of their life. And she gave me a book to read, and the book was called Imagine Heaven. And it's a book about people who have near-death experiences. And regardless of who the person having that near-death experience saw during the experience, whether it was God or a saint or a friend or a relative, whoever it was, almost everybody got asked one question. And that question was, how do you care for my people? In other words, how do we take care of each other? How do we form relationships? How do we form those deep connections? It's not about leaving a legacy, isn't how much money you have or, giving your house to your kids or anything like that. It's about the connections that we have in life.
The more I go through it, the more I realize that too. It's all the connections and helping people out. Those those three questions things. I'm just thinking back to this third truth of what you leave behind, weave in to help people. Your first thing I thought of when you were saying the three questions thing, I'm like, I thought of social media right away too, and how people, like especially my age, don't talk to people as much anymore, at least in person. And so I was thinking, I was like, as you were saying that stuff, how can people my age, or like people any age, who don't feel like they necessarily have something to give and weave into people's hearts to like help people out, besides just like the sports they're doing and entertaining and everything else. And I think your three questions thing is such a good way to do it. And I've heard that one other time. I totally forgot about it till you just brought it up, that introduce, follow-up question. And if you get one more question in there, all of a sudden people will start talking, and then you are going who knows where. But I wanted your viewpoint on that, of just, it seems like so many people don't do that anymore, or can't do that, or they're nervous to have those interactions.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and that's just a direct result where, I care about, if you and I are on our phones and you say, "Oh, Terry, I really like what you were wearing." Oh, Gabe likes what I was wearing. Who cares? Who cares what? And you make a great point. People, especially young people, think their lives, it's like, what do I have to contribute? I'm young. I don't really have any experiences. And I'll tell you a quick story. This was a nurse, another nurse story. This was a nurse who was about 25 years old, so right around your age, already a nurse, but learning how to do things on the unit where I was being treated. And about 6 months later, she was taking care of me by herself. And she came in and she said, "Terry, I've got a story I want to tell you, but I'm a little uncomfortable telling it to you." And Gabe, I didn't know how to respond to that. I was like, well, I hope you decide you want to tell me, because I think I would enjoy hearing it. So she's in and out for the next couple hours, and then finally comes in, sits down. She's like, "All right, here's the story." She said, "When I first met you, I was going to quit nursing. I'd had a very good friend of mine die. I was in a really dark place, talked it over with my family. I was going to quit nursing, and I was going to go to work for Amazon. And then I met you. And I see what you go through. I see I have a very bad reaction to the medicine that I'm given at the hospital. And I see that you keep coming back every single day, no matter how bad it is, you keep coming back." And she said, "Then I went in the file and I read your entire story." And she said, "When I finished reading your story, I knew I was where I was supposed to be." Now, she would have never told me that story. I would have had no idea that my life had had such a positive impact on this young woman. So, whoever is out there listening to us, don't think your life doesn't matter. I promise you, people are watching how you handle your difficulty, your adversity in life, and would give almost everything they have just to walk 5 minutes in your shoes. So, understand that your life does matter.
And yeah, and just to build off of that, you can go through so many times too that you don't even think it does, and it can get hard and everything else. And then there's those spur of the moments, like you just said, where you realize, or something comes to the surface of your eyes, and it's presented to you, and you actually see everything that's been happening and how it's helped out, and helped someone out. I mean, too, which is exactly what you mean. One thing that I was thinking of as you just said that is about the cancer too, because I've had some health situations of my own, Terry, and I have seen firsthand for myself, on not cancer but some heart stuff, of the power of, like, literally the mental state to control and change or help out, or hinder in other cases, the physical outcome. Like, I at least can personally testify for that. And not only that, I know some family members who have gone through cancer treatments, but before they've gone through it, we knew how strong they were, like mentally, like they were either very intellectually driven, or they were workaholics, and they had the traits that you can think of. And I fully believe it was because of those traits that come back to like their mental state, their pursuit, whatever the case is, that got them through their treatment be longer than they thought they would, or any of the other cases. And I say all that because I wanted to see your perspective, especially now after talking to you more, about how much you think your mental state has helped prolong your treatment or keep you going through it all. And I'm sure it stems from all the other life experiences you've had too, but I was really wondering that as I've heard you talk.
Yeah, I think it's huge. I mean, when I was diagnosed in 2012, I was told that I'd be dead in 2 years. But
Exactly.
what doctors are like Vegas. You know, they handicap you based on, okay, you're a person of this age in this health situation with this stage of cancer. Based on all that, you're going to live 2 years. What doctors don't know is that you want to see your child graduate from high school or graduate from college or walk them down the aisle when they get married or be with your grandkids. And those intrinsic things, those things that you can't quantify, that mental, you know what? I want to be here for that. That is so much more powerful than just the doctor saying, hey, you're going to be dead in 2 years. Now, the converse of that is true. And I've seen people during these 12 plus years of cancer have a doctor tell them, well, yeah, you're probably going to be dead in 3 years, 2 years, 6 months, whatever it ends up being. And Gabe, almost on the date, the anniversary of being told that, they die because they believe what the doctor's going to say. Doctors don't know your heart. They don't know your mind. They don't know your soul. And those things are that's who you are. This is just a facade. This is just an exterior. It's like an egg. And this is the shell. The real part is on the inside. And that real part drives the outside, the physical part. So don't ever take a doctor's word. I'm not saying doctors don't know. They do. But what I'm saying is you are so much more powerful than what the doctors are telling you.
Yeah, that's exactly it. They have all the facts that they can see, but and what they can relate back to other statistics, but there's still more. You got more power than you think is the ultimate of what I'm thinking of that. And I just want to wrap that up with this one of where you do need understand that you leave behind stuff that weaves in the heart of other people, like what you can do, how you can help people. And I just stem back once again to those three questions. I think that's such a power play that people could use. And I am going to make sure I start using that more again, Terry. Because like I said, I remember, once you said that, I remember I've heard that before, but I have not pulled it out in a while. And so I need to.
Yeah. I mean, it's very powerful. People are narcissistic. They love talking about themselves. And people will think you're a great conversationalist if you don't say anything, but just ask them a few questions.
And I'm just thinking all right, then I'm going to move this on to the next one. But I'm thinking like back to our basketball player or whatever. If you're having troubles with doing something on the court or you can't control something or anything else, I challenge someone to try this. Go out and do the 3-question trick with people or with one person a day. Go back to the basketball court, try the thing you've been having a challenge with, and see if you can improve on it. I almost guarantee you will have an improvement, and I'm sure you can kind of assume the same thing just from that.
I mean, it's true. And so we become what we think. And, you know, there have been studies done where, you know, if you took a basketball and you went out on the court and you started to practice free throws, there would be, if you were in an MRI machine, there'd be a certain part of your brain that would light up by you engaging in that. The interesting thing about that is if you think about taking a basketball, going out onto the court and practicing free throws, that exact same area of your brain will light up. So whether you do it or whether you think about it, you're going to engage that portion of your brain. So be very careful how you talk to yourself. And regardless of what we think, we all talk to ourselves. I talk to myself all the time. Make sure what you say is good, is positive, is nurturing, is going to get you to where you want to be. Because if you keep telling yourself, I can't do this, I can't do this, I can't do this, sooner or later, you're going to hardwire your brain to the point where you're right. You can't do this. We all become what we think.
I had a mentor once say that it's a simple saying that thoughts become things no matter what. You're the thing and it will become the thought at some point. So power back to you. All right, this last one here, your fourth truth, remembering that as long as you don't quit, you can never be defeated. That's a powerful statement. And I mean, I see it in so many different ways and I just want to hear your viewpoints on this one.
For
What your
sure.
thoughts, where they come from, and everything else.
Yeah, the way this resonates with me is this. Someday my pain is going to end. It may end through surgery. It may end through the development of some new kind of medication or something like that. Quite frankly, it may end when I die. But if I quit, if I give up, if I give in to pain, then pain will always be part of my life. I'm going to tell you another story, true story, happened back in the 1950s at Johns Hopkins University. There was a professor there that was doing an experiment with rats, and he wanted to see how long the average rat could tread water. So he put rats in a tank of water that was over their head, and the average rat treaded water for about 15 minutes. And just as those rats were getting ready to sink and drown, he reached in, grabbed them, pulled them out, dried them off, and let them rest for a while. And then he took the exact same rats and put them back in that exact same tank of water. And the second time around, on average, those rats treaded water for 60 hours. Now, think about that. The first time, 15 minutes. It's not like you're going to flunk a test or your business is going to go under or your marriage is going to fail. You're going to die. Your life is going to be over. And the second time around, 60 hours, which taught me two things. Number one, the importance of hope in our lives. That if we know we're doing the right things, maybe not today, maybe not this month, maybe not even this year, but there's a very good chance if we know we're doing the right things that we'll get to where we want to be. And the second thing it taught me was just how much more our physical bodies can handle than we ever thought they could. We quit, we give up, we give in long before our bodies do because, and here it comes back full circle, because we listen to our brains. Our brains tell us this hurts, it's uncomfortable, knock it off, stop doing this. But just like a marathon runner, and we've heard this all the time, a marathon runner eventually hits the wall where they don't think they can move forward. But if they keep putting one foot in front of the other, eventually they will break through that wall, get that second win, and be able to complete the marathon. That same thing happens in our lives. Our brains tell us it hurts, it's uncomfortable, stop doing it. If you can push through the pain, you will be a stronger and more resilient individual.
I'm just I'm relating so many things of what you say to my kind of life experiences in a way too, because uh I've ran a marathon before, Terry, and the wall it's real, and I can't say I was trained enough to push through the wall in that amount of a stake, but I fully understand the metaphor, and it is so real. And then the whole rat study, you probably don't know this either, but my master's degree, I was basically undergrad and grad school. I was in a neuroscience lab that was rodent based, rodent based, all about stress, and it tied like nutrition and fitness to stress. And so I've seen firsthand the power of that mammalian just mind, the outside of the big brain that humans have, just the inside brain and how it powers and where it all goes. And you're exactly it. I think humans in themselves have that consciousness to talk out of, and we're in the situations when those challenges happen. You can be like, oh, that's too much. I don't want to do it anymore. Whereas sometimes animals, like, they don't have that option, or like in that study, they get put back in. They're not talking to them. I don't want to swim anymore.
Right.
They just keep swimming. They that's what they do, and it's insane to hear you say that. What's probably the most, just because your life is, I'm just relating it to my family and other things. It's so inspirational. What's probably the biggest story of your life that you're thinking ties back to this one? That if you don't quit, you won't be defeated.
So I think it was really having my leg amputated. I had my leg amputated in the middle of the COVID pandemic. They had shut down all elective surgeries. I'd had a tumor kind of in my ankle area that had broken my leg, that had fractured my tibia on my shin bone. And so my doctor had to get special permission to take off my leg. And I remember I was not allowed to have anyone with me. So my wife dropped me off at the hospital the morning I had my leg amputated. I was wheeled back into this pre-op area, which is this big room divided in like 30 smaller rooms, all designed to be prepping people for all kinds of surgery. And Gabe, I was the only person in that room, me, the nurse, and an anesthesiology resident. And I was scared to death. And they told me I'd be in the hospital for 10 days to 2 weeks to learn how to function without having a leg. They sent me home after 48 hours saying, it's COVID. We got to get you home. I was not ready to go home. My house was not ready. My wife had not gotten the house ready. She didn't know. It's like, I got 2 weeks to get this ready. No, go home, figure it out. And so, I mean, as long as you don't quit, as long as you just keep trying to figure it out, trying to move forward, I think eventually you'll get there. And we did. We did. We figured out how to function in a world where I don't have a leg anymore after 48 hours of having that leg cut off. So I think that's probably the biggest story that illustrates that truth.
And I did not realize that, like, not all of your stories, but a good amount of more your recent endeavors have been, or yeah, just like the books and the motivation check and the amputation, that's been recent. I didn't really realize it was less than 5 years ago. That's crazy. And I'm thankful for your being here and talking to me, Terry. I mean, I picked up so much from what you've been saying and just everything else that you've been talking about. And I know we could go on and on. One thing I was just wondering about, and I've picked up a lot just from our conversation here, but what's your drive to keep doing all these podcasts? I mean, I don't know if you said it on here or not, but you've been in over like 600 podcasts. I mean, on LinkedIn, you have the connections. Like, you are still purpose driven. You keep going. What's the ultimate, like, the why, I guess?
I mean, the why goes back to, putting as much goodness, positivity, motivation, love back into the world as I possibly can. I think it's the reason I'm still here. I have a very deep faith in God. And I remember after I had my leg amputated and I had these tumors in my lungs, my doctor showed me my CAT scan results. And Gabe, I don't know how to read a CAT scan. I didn't go to medical school or anything like that. But, you could kind of look at it and be like, oh, well, that sure doesn't look like it belongs there. I had these big tumors in my lungs. I had fluid all around the pleural spaces of my lungs. Without being gross, I was coughing up green, bloody phlegm all the time. And I remember looking at my doctor and saying, how was I alive? And I'll never forget this. My doctor put his head down. He shook his head no. And then he looked up at me and he said, I don't know, because you shouldn't have been. Which said to me, God's not done with me yet. I think God's using my infirmity, using my pain, my suffering to show other people his power, his grace, his love, and what you can do if you just don't quit, if you just keep trying to move forward one day at a time.
I mean, that's just crazy. That's awesome. I mean, not awesome situation, but awesome story, to say the least. Probably the last thing I have for you is, I'm just thinking about this now, and after our conversation is I know there are some like high school younger athletes, and I help some college athletes too, as I keep all this going and evolving. But I talk to some young, like, high school athletes, like, routinely. What would be some messages, or like one take home message, if you had one? Because I know you've coached in the past too, which is why I ask you this, that you'd give to them, or just anyone too. Obviously, the message will spread to anyone too. It wouldn't just be to that audience. But
Yeah, and then well, as soon as you said that, I mean, what immediately jumped into my mind is this: it's more important who you work with and who you work for than it is the work that you do. Find people that care about you. Find people that are willing to invest in you. Find people who want to see you succeed, and hitch your wagon to those people and climb your mountains together.
that's powerful. What's a wrap that up, if you have one, with one more story of your own success? 'Cause I'm thinking back to some of the things that I've been doing, and I can start to think about some stories too, just in the whole business sense that I've been trying to develop. But with your rich history, what's one more story that kind of ties that, of who you're with, what you're doing, not just the end
I,
result, right?
I'll tell you a basketball story, and it's kind of a funny story, but it's a true story. So 1982, It was my senior year in college. And we are playing North Carolina and Michael Jordan. And that was the year Michael Jordan would take North Carolina to the national championship and win the national championship. The following night, we played Jim Valvano and North Carolina State, who the following year, 1983, they would win the national championship. But go back to North Carolina. So Michael Jordan. Fast forward, say 20 years. My youngest brother, the one who pitched for the University of Notre Dame, is now a basketball coach at Loyola Academy in Chicago. And he is coaching Michael Jordan's two sons. And he said, one day I'm at practice. He tells the story better than I do. He said, one day I'm at practice and I'm teaching the kids a drill. And I look up and nobody's paying attention to me. So I look where the kids are looking, which is over at the door to come into the gym. And Michael Jordan had come into the gym as a dad to pick his kids up after practice and take them home. And my brother looked at him and said, "Hey, Michael, you're a little bit of a distraction. Would you mind waiting out in the hall until practice was over?" And Jordan and his wife were incredibly gracious people. And he was like, "Yeah, sure, coach. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt your practice or anything. I'll wait outside until practice is over." And my brother thought later, I'm probably the only coach in the history of basketball that ever picked Michael Jordan out of practice. So just a cute, funny story for you.
Oh man, yeah. I mean, that's crazy, and yeah, that's awesome. I mean, just even talking to Michael Jordan and your history of just connections and everything else, it's awesome. Terry, how could people find you if they had questions about anything that we talked about, or just liked what you've been talking about, or anything of the sorts?
Sure. So I have a blog slash website. I'll imagine this, a motivational check, where
Yeah,
every day I put up a thought for the day. And usually with that thought comes a question about how maybe you could apply it into your life. I have recommendations for books to read, videos to watch. You can leave me a message. That's all at motivationalcheck.com.
cool. Thanks. I appreciate this so much, Terry. Do you have any final words of wisdom or any other things before we kind of sign off here? I usually,
Well, let me leave you with one more story, if you don't mind.
yeah, no, we're
Um,
good.
okay. So
That's why I asked.
it's another nurse story. So all I got is sports and nurse stories. So this is going to be another nurse story. And one of my nurses recently asked me what it was like to have my foot amputated in 2018 and my leg amputated in 2020. And I told her it certainly has not been easy. I'm 6'8", so learning to walk again, falling is not an option. You get hurt from this. So I told her, I said, cancer can take all my physical faculties, but cancer can't touch my mind. It can't touch my heart, and it can't touch my soul. And that's who I am. That's who you are, Gabe. That's who everybody who's listening to us is. And we spend a tremendous amount of time working on this exterior. We go to the gym, we eat right, get enough rest, reduce stress. And I'm certainly not telling you not to do that. But what I am suggesting is this: maybe every day, spend a little more time working on who you really are, your heart, your mind, and your soul. We know at some point, who knows when, this body is going to die, it's going to decay, and it's going to go away. But our heart, our minds, and our souls, those things live on. Those things are eternal. And I just don't think we spend nearly as much time working on them as we probably should.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, that's kind of the life we live in. People very distracted and everything else of the sorts. And if we focus on those and keep improving them, I mean, sky's the limit per se. And who knows how you take it. I appreciate it a lot, Terry. I'm just going to close this off here now, kind of with the same close I usually do. But the Athletes Health Podcast, talking to athletes, coaches, leaders, anyone we can learn these tips, tricks from. I'm just trying to add more service and everything to my value, to my coaching, mental performance coaching service. And I'm very glad I got you on here and we had this conversation. This was great. And I cannot wait to re-listen to it, take some notes and everything else of the same, Terry. But that is all I have today. So thank you, Terry, and thanks everyone who listened. And that's about all. So have a good one.